Welcome back to DC Thursday after a great summer. I hope everyone enjoyed your time this summer, and as I know I did. Uh, we're really excited to have an amazing guest today to kick off our fall sessions. And we have Bhaskar Ghosh, otherwise known as BG, who is a partner and CTO at 8VC, which is a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. BG focuses on investing in early startups, including B2B and SaaS companies, as well as enterprise infrastructure and data-driven businesses. So he's a great fit for the program. We've had a great relationship over time. Originally met at Data Council, which is quite exciting. So BG has been a member of our community for the last couple of years or so. Before that, to finish the introduction, BG was an engineering executive for multiple different companies, including LinkedIn, where he was the founding head of the data infrastructure team. And previously, before that, BG ran engineering at Right Media, which was acquired by Yahoo. And he also worked at Oracle and Informix. So BG, there's a lot of data stuff there. Of course, I can't forget your position at CTO of Nerdwallet as well, which was a very fast growing company where you presided over a lot of scale and a lot of growth there as well. So BG, in addition to all that, you have a PhD from Yale in CS. What more can I say? Did I miss something? Tell me, please.
No, I think you covered it really well. Anyway, Pete, thanks so much for inviting me. I've been a big fan of Data Council and you and your leadership and how you built a network. It's pretty amazing. So thank you for inviting me. No, I mean, you covered it. You know, I did a PhD in graph algorithms many years ago and just accidentally went to a company I didn't know was a very hot company called Informix. It was the hottest database company of the time. And I didn't have much of a database background, but, you know, absolutely loved working in databases. And I would say Informix and Oracle kind of shaped my engineering culture. Always got to work with people smarter than me and on very beautifully architected products, you know, where systems design was important. I would say systems design and the powers of abstraction that Informix and Oracle had in their products has influenced me, not just in, you know, building tech, but also in building teams and orgs. And even now, when I look at companies and entrepreneurs and products as an investor.
So very early start in the database world, in Informix. And I want to hear a little bit more about the background, your background as well. I just want to remind the audience that we will take questions in the chat. So if folks have questions for you about your experience, your career, or other questions that cross their mind, they can feel free to sound off in the chat, and we'll try to get to the questions to the extent that we can.
Yeah, I would love to take questions live, and people can always follow up with me. Happy to be of service to anybody who's attending the talk. So coming back to the arc, go ahead.
Yeah, so after Informix, you know, tell us a little bit more about where you went from there.
You know, from Informix, I was lucky to implement something called optimizer directives, which is a fairly hard thing in, you know, query optimization for databases. And that was one reason that Oracle hired me. I ended up spending many years at Oracle, and, you know, our groups there were phenomenal. All these companies came out of the two floors from the RDBMS kernel side. You know, Snowflake came out, Rubrik came out, Nutanix came out. So just a bunch of really smart, great cultured people. Again, just to repeat myself, a lot of my engineering culture came from watching and learning at Oracle. I went to Yahoo a bit late. I got really lucky. I was recruited to inside Yahoo after a fairly short time to run this hot company that we had just bought called Right Media. And while ads has its pros and cons about human society, I would say for a computer scientist and software engineer, you know, ads is an amazing area to work in because it sits at the confluence of databases, distributed systems, economic systems, marketplace design, and AI, very heavy use of AI. Right Media was amazing for multiple reasons, you know, amazing business, pioneering thought around ad exchanges, but also I was lucky to have a team around me, many of whom later followed me to LinkedIn. And, you know, that way, Yahoo was just a very formative part of my career. And I would say Right Media, the culture was amazing. And I just want to call out, I think Yahoo probably doesn't get as much love and respect now in this generation of engineers, but I'm going to tell you, Yahoo engineering, especially early Yahoo, was just world class, at the level of Google. And also it was a highly entrepreneurial culture internally, moved very fast, very startup oriented. So just want to give a shout out to the mentorship and learning that I went through at Yahoo. I was very lucky now in hindsight to, few of us went to LinkedIn. My boss, David Hinkey, and then he hired us. Jeff Weiner was very serious about investing in data. A few of us were hired. Just an anecdote is, this I have not put on my resume. My good friend GK, who was supposed to run security at LinkedIn, couldn't join on the same day as me. GK used to be head of security at Yahoo. And I had to run and build the security team at LinkedIn also. So I was head of security and head of data, and neither of them quite existed. So LinkedIn, I obviously was a very pivotal and formative part of my career and the network and what we got to do. So we'll dive into it a bit more. After LinkedIn, I wanted to run kind of a smaller B2C company. So made a very contrarian bet to run technology at Nerdwallet. Amazing CEO, Tim Chen, just and it was fun being there because, it was more, going into a company in a 0 to 1 phase where you're trying to turn it into a tech-focused and product-focused company is always hard, but a great learning experience. And then, I actually was going to go spend some time with Hillary Clinton's administration to work on privacy. That didn't happen. Became a fairly prolific seed investor. Joe Lonsdale was the founder of Palantir and 8VC, and I became friends. And things led to one another. And then, as a lark, I joined 8VC. So that was in full-time back as a partner in 2017, and I'm just starting my 5th year now. So yeah.
Got it. Well, that's that's quite the background. I wanted to ask you actually, like what was the thought behind getting the PhD in CS? Did you think you were going to go into academia? Was that the plan, or how did you sort of get dragged into industry, and how did that happen?
I think my career is always a set of coincidences and with complete lack of planning. So if I give people advice about their careers, feel free to know. I loved algorithms. I would say computers. I mean, going to college in India, we didn't have access to as much computing power or personal computers as people did in the US. So we studied computer science as a science really hard. So our backgrounds for that generation of computer scientists was fairly deep and kind of multidimensional, and computer science was a smaller topic, was a smaller discipline then. But I would say I was just in love with the study of algorithms. So I didn't know what I was going to do. Going to academia was one plan. It turned out my advisor said, "Hey, you'll thrive in Silicon Valley. Go work on software." That's basically what happened. And I interviewed and I got offers from HP Labs and from Informix, and just chose Informix accidentally. So set of wonderful coincidences, but still remain student and lover of computer science in general.
Got it. And you mentioned a couple times, I think, already the culture at some of those early companies that you worked at, Informix, Yahoo Right Media, just as examples, Oracle
in a big way.
What was great about those cultures, and what's missing, if anything, from sort of current engineering culture that is sort of a contrast to you?
Yahoo culture was more entrepreneurial, build your own infrastructure. But if you look at companies like database companies at that time, and when I graduated from my PhD in 95, there were not a lot of places to go to do deep systems work or deep computer science work. You went to Bell Labs, you did work on networking, you went to Sun, or you went to SGI to build machines and compilers, or you went to database companies like Ingress, Tandem, DB2 IBM, Oracle Informix. Very small and very hard to get into, very select. I would say just the fact that this was the luckiest thing that happened, if I look back, is databases is one area where industry has innovated on par with academia. And so you are going into an industry where absolutely cutting edge problems are being solved in terms of systems design, in terms of how to support applications. I mean, think about it. Airline reservation systems all the way to bank ATMs running on Oracle databases. We take it for granted now. It was not true then. I mean, things were happening. So I would say new industries were being created because databases were being innovated on by these small set of companies, including Oracle. So that's one. One is, so they were kind of pioneering companies. Second is the quality of hiring, promotions, leadership in these companies was extremely high and consistent. You had to be really good to kind of gain influence in the company. I mean, look at the founders of Snowflake. I was lucky to work with them very closely for many years on the Oracle Parallel Query Engine. They're amazing world-class engineers. Look at the, one of the founders of Yugabyte that we're an investor in, Kannan, one of the star engineers out of Oracle, right? So I would say just the quality of hiring was great. The other part is the products were architected beautifully with lots of attention to separation of concerns, and architecture was great, APIs were great. When you start your career working on beautifully architected products, you kind of get to know what does good software look like. So those were some of the reasons that I feel very obligated and happy, looking back at my days at Informix.
That's great. Well, I have to say that from running Data Council over the years, we've primarily been an industry conference, but when we get academic speakers, especially in the databases category, to come and share cutting edge research, to me, those are some of the most interesting talks that we've had at Data Council over the years. Because I think that just fundamentally, any engineer of any type, really appreciates sort of the architecture of how data is processed, because data is used in all their systems, whether they're a quote data engineer or not. Data is so important, and most of us remember like the how our eyes lit up when we first learned SQL, for instance, and the power of the relational join. And I think that these basic notions are magic for engineers of all shapes and sizes, not just data engineers. And to hear that the academic research that's sort of shaping and moving data theory and systems forward has been amazing. So I totally
100%.
understand that.
I mean, you're absolutely right. Just a brief point there. I think the academic side is so productive also because the industry side is eager to accept and imbibe and incorporate stuff. So, problems are jointly defined, and often problems are, decomposable into parts, some of which is solvable inside of academia without having access to huge amounts of data and systems, right? I would say database is one of the few industries, distributed systems and databases, where this sort of joint innovation has happened, and it's still continuing. And you see that kind of in AI infrastructure now. You see that in many, many other levels. Everything around data and systems, I'd say, yeah.
Yep, great. Well, let's jump to the LinkedIn portion of your experience, because so much happened there, and so many of us know, we're on a first name basis with the open source that came out of LinkedIn, right? We use Kafka, we know about Pinot, we've heard about Espresso, we know about Data Hub and metadata systems increasingly in this present era. All of these things were birthed at LinkedIn in the last 10 or so years. Tell us, like, when you joined LinkedIn, what was the state of the data infrastructure then, as best as you can recall?
There wasn't like a very heavily demarcated data infrastructure team. I think there were 5 or 6 engineers. I would say much of LinkedIn used to run on Oracle when I joined. And Jean-Luc, who was the founding CTO of LinkedIn, very, very smart guy. He had helped implement a very important system called Data Bus, which is a change capture data pipeline coming out of the backend of Oracle logs. Very hard system to build. If you go look back, he gave a beautiful talk about it way back 2007-8. We came in early 2010. I think the main infrastructure, if you want to build infrastructure inside a company, the first thing that has to happen is kind of organizational buy-in and cultural buy-in, right? So when a few of us from Yahoo got to LinkedIn, and when I was, under a lot of support from my boss, David Henke, and our CEO, Jeff Wiener, amazing champions of the infrastructure team. When I was, trying to build out the team and hired all these amazing engineers who I'll name shortly, I think the way LinkedIn had reached success at that time is by running as a sort of product organizations. So there was like very creative product managers who had their own engineering counterparts. And LinkedIn at that time hadn't reached the level of scale where you need to build like globally scalable web scale systems. It didn't, right? Smaller. When I got there, we were probably in the 70 million range or something. which was large, but not that large. I mean, when I left Yahoo, the number of unique users in our database in my team was 880 million. I still remember the number, December of 2009, right? So you're talking, and then LinkedIn graph was growing, densifying, and just growing in leaps and bounds. So the model that you can run things with product and engineering paired up works up to a certain point. That way, every product engineering lead tries to build her own infrastructure. And it works up to a certain point, then it stops working, right? Because it's not cost efficient. And many people who are well-versed in product engineering are not well-versed in building distributed systems and databases. So I think it took a lot of guts from management to decide that, hey, we got to create these horizontal disciplines, not just in ops, not just in security, but in data also. So I think a lot of that demarcation happened. It all looks very well structured now, but that's not how it was. Every time you change culture, decision making, prioritization, where will resources go? It is sausage making, right? Change is hard, right? So that's one. But I would say Reed, Jeff, Henke, they were all amazingly supportive, especially because Jeff and Henke had that muscle memory coming in from Yahoo, right? They had seen horizontal teams work both in Yahoo Search as well as in Yahoo Ads. Fair enough. So I would say that was one important thing. And at that, when we went in, Jay had just started thinking about Kafka. Data Bus was the kind of the change capture pipeline. Everything was running on Oracle. And initially, it was hard. I mean, I was very lucky to have all these amazingly talented builders, engineers, leaders join. Shashanka, who is now founder of Acryl, Kapil, who now runs much of LinkedIn data, Swaroop, who's founder of Acryl, Kishore came in a little bit later, founder of Pino, Chavdar, who built Databus, all of them came in from my past network at Yahoo and Oracle. Initially, we focused on solving the database problem. We tried out Mongo, it didn't work. And it took
how many different databases would you say, like how many different types of data stores did you have in those days, for example?
At that time, on the online side, remember LinkedIn, Yahoo, you broadly define data infrastructure and systems into three different pieces. One is online, which is the site backend where you're doing OLTP essentially at scale. That's then you have your data warehouse analytics, what we call data lake today, that let's call that offline. Then the third data systems that you have is what is called nearline, which are all the AI indexes, all the graph indexes, which are mostly read-only, but you build like specialized serving systems there, right? Ads backend, so on. So online, offline, nearline. Initially, I was just working on the online side, right? It was mostly working on Oracle, but with a bunch of Redis caches on top. That's it. And things were falling over all the time because Oracle.
You're talking about Yahoo or you're talking about LinkedIn now?
I'm talking about LinkedIn, sorry. So broadly, to look at data infrastructure, you can look at this, what I call the three-phase ecosystem, right? You have online, which is the site-facing stuff, source of truth systems, offline, which is all your analytics, data warehouse stuff. And you have to forget it. And then you have nearline, which are your AI indexes, graph indexes, which you have to be kept up to date, but mostly heavy read-only. So we focused on the online side. And, I remember we went to either Sigmund or VLDB conference in Arizona, and I mustered up courage and approached, the god Jeffrey Dean from Google and said, hey, we are trying to build a new backend at LinkedIn, we have to move quickly and, yet make sure that it works. And, building source of truth systems, OLTP systems are hard. I still remember, he was very kind, gave me one piece of advice, which I still remember. Shashanka might remember also. He said, try to use as much battle-tested open source as possible. Don't try to re-implement the storage layer. So I would say because at that time, we were looking at supporting LinkedIn profile, LinkedIn feeds, LinkedIn mailbox, a few use cases which were kind of not scaling. We decided that the data model had to be Mongo-ish, so kind of document style, so that the APIs and the programming model being exposed to the programmers is not SQL. It is actually like Mongo-ish. So no SQL-ish, new SQL-ish. But we decided that the entire backend should be like battle-tested open source. So we picked MySQL, and because MySQL allowed like a bunch of pluggable backends like InnoDB and ISAM, we picked MySQL with InnoDB. But large part of the beauty initially was in thinking through the application programming model. I still remember, I would say, Shashanka, Kapil, Swaroop, these guys really thought that through. I still remember being in like whiteboarding sessions because ultimately the product organizations were all looking at us newbies saying, hey man, what are you going to build for us? And we can't like rewrite our entire application. So the ORM layer, the programming layer was really important. And then what happened, a series of innovations happened in Espresso. Kapil and Kishore came up with like a open source project later called Helix, which is based on Zookeeper for shard management, right? So we had to think about how to manage clusters. And these guys, and we were lucky to attract amazing engineers, which is a recurring theme if you want to do something like distributed systems and data. It took many years for Oracle to be, forgive me, Espresso to be stabilized. But now I was talking to Kapil last night at LinkedIn, like hundreds of use cases, almost everything other than the graph runs on Espresso today. So I would
tell us, because the audience may or may not have knowledge deeply as to what Espresso is.
It's a distributed.
Give us a quick overview of the architecture and sort of what it's for.
It's a source of truth distributed document style database, sharded, massively scalable, with a SQL backend and kind of a document style programming front end.
You chose to build this instead of using Mongo. Why?
At that time, this was 2010, early 2010, Mongo did not scale. Mongo now and Mongo then are quite different. Remember Mongo, I forget the name of the company they bought. I should look it up. They had serious issues.
Tengen.
Tengen is the name of the company. Then they bought like this database company, whose backend they used to solve a lot of issues around partition locks and row locks. Yeah, they had some reader-writer issues. So in our experiments, it did not scale at the kind of throughput and scale that we needed it to. So looking back, it was a very high risk to build Espresso. So that was an online side. By that time, Jay, amazingly creative leader and builder, Jay Krebs, had come up with the idea of Kafka, which was initially for shipping logs, right? So it didn't have to be like exact ones. And we had two pipelines running, one for change data through Databus, which we also open sourced. By the way, all of these projects, people can find beautiful papers written about. Espresso, Databus, they all have great papers written. You can just go look it up. And later on, we merged Databus and Kafka, towards the end of my tenure, which was the right design decision, where the shipping mechanism all became Kafka. And so on the online side, there were all these creative projects. And what happened about midway through my time at LinkedIn, to just go back, is initially I was lucky to run the online side, which included all these pieces. And then we expanded and kind of centralized leadership for all of data. So then I, for like 2.5 years, also had to be responsible for the entire offline systems, the data warehouse, the HDF, the entire Hadoop system, ETL pipelines, BI, everything. On that side, very briefly, we had a lot of stuff running, like Oracle was running the warehouse. We had Greenplum, we had, I forget what else we had, task force company, forgetting the name. I had to make some hard decisions around getting all of them out. And, we centralized around Hadoop for the entire ETL and the AI index building part. And we centralized on Teradata for the warehouse. And I was talking to Kapil last night. As of now, Teradata has been moved out. The entire thing is now on like massive exabytes of data on Hadoop as kind of the blob store, with like Spark and Presto running on top. And, they now have all the BI stuff running on Pinot. So just like LinkedIn itself, the point I'm trying to make is the huge success of the business, and the business being data-driven, has enabled LinkedIn to go through 3 to 4 generations of data infrastructure rewrites now, scale up. And that's, looking back, I would say that's an uncommon theme. I would say Google did everything before us. I would say Yahoo did a bunch of things that were never published, but Yahoo did it. Facebook and LinkedIn did it very well. Not a lot of companies have done it at that level of innovation, where the entire data stack they have almost built. So that's one arc of the story. The other arc of the story is, and I cannot take any credit there, I would say I learned a lot about open source from my Yahoo days. Yahoo had a tremendous culture around open hackathons and taking stuff to production from hackathons and citizen programmers coming in. So a lot of the culture of Yahoo was amazingly open and democratic, based on open and free software. And LinkedIn, for the leaders who came in before me, there was already a propensity towards open source. I was lucky with my team, that we were lucky to kind of as kind of accelerated. Because open source turned out to be a great way to involve community, turned out to be a great hiring mechanism. And I would say that is something we should all be very collectively proud of, that so much of software at LinkedIn was actually open sourced. That, to be fair, now so many startups use stuff that came out of, say, Facebook and LinkedIn. Actually look at it, right? And I would say, as a computer scientist, as a programmer, as a software engineer, I feel really proud that this sort of network effect was created by this small group of companies. And, if you look at it after that, Twitter, Netflix, Pinterest, Airbnb have kind of carried on the mantle. So I would say that's like a huge cultural part of Silicon Valley that I was lucky to be there. And a bunch of us, we still believe very strongly on the open source side. And it continues to this day in my career.
How did LinkedIn decide which open source projects, like generally speaking, to open source, which projects to open source and which not to? Was there any kind of rubric there, or how did that work, practically speaking?
I don't know how it is today. During my time, it was, it had to be something fairly heavyweight. Like whether you were doing a bunch of the APM stuff or deployment stuff on top of Hadoop, Azkaban came out of LinkedIn also. I think something called White Elephant, a bunch of stuff. And then under couples, leadership, on the offline side, a lot of heavy duty. I think the common theme is the following. Any project that has to be open source should have solved a really important use case really important problem inside the company and should be running in production. Like there has to be some weight that it's a non-trivial project. It has hit production and it is going to make LinkedIn proud, or the company proud, to see it open sourced, and it will be useful. So I would say the bar during our time, and I think even now, is quite high, that it essentially has to be deep enough, solve a business use case, and has to have been stabilized in production. So
and was it seen as a hiring benefit, largely?
Very much, because that was a very strong way of reaching universities and junior programmers. And at LinkedIn and later on, at all companies, I would say a lot of kind of young new college grad programmers get attracted to companies because of the beauty, quality, and the culture of software that comes from open source. So I would say it's a very strong secondary network effect in talent attraction.
For sure, definitely. Well, I guess there's kind of two aspects there that it would be fun to get a follow-up from you on. One is just the notion of building a horizontal data platform organization. Because it seemed like, according to your cultural sort of timeline, like that was what had to happen first. LinkedIn had to buy in to building a horizontal parts of the team, and that enabled all of these great things out of data infrastructure to emerge. Secondly, on top of that, you also made a commitment to open source and to open source your own stuff, because it was so groundbreaking and had the potential to change industry and also sort of bring top engineers to LinkedIn. How do you think these two strategies map to, I don't know how to describe it, a mere mortal company today? Like, should everyone aspire to be a LinkedIn and have a horizontal data organization and hiring the best engineers in the world to write open source? Like, is that something that every company can do, or what's your learning from that in terms of how that sort of informs, the way a team or a culture or an organization should think about structuring their data team and systems now in the present day?
Yeah, I would say it depends, and I'm going to give you a partly provocative answer. So bear with me for a second. I would say the world today versus the world in 2009-10, when we started all this stuff, is quite different. I would say the contributions from Facebook, LinkedIn, Google, about verticalized data, specialized data systems, right? Not just in data movement like Kafka and Pulsar and NAT and others, not just in graph engines, not just in document style databases, not just in shardable Postgres databases. All of that a lot of that has been open sourced and is available as services from public cloud providers, right? So from purely distributed systems and database point of view, a lot of stuff is already available. So companies just don't need to build that. They can just use services available on public clouds to do it. And a lot of these services are based on open source projects, so you can actually go read the code and kind of there's this combination. So the depends part of it is, I think we were all fortunate at Silicon Valley to be at the right place at the right time, where all of these companies were in hyper growth, whether it's Google or Yahoo or LinkedIn or Facebook or Netflix. And data was a core part of the feedback loop, and data was a core part of the business model. So didn't take long for management to understand, for the founders inside the company to understand that this is not a cost. It's actually a high positive ROI effort. That if you build the data infrastructure and the AI infrastructure and analytics infrastructure well and systems infrastructure, it'll pay off in droves because we are scaling. Now, so that means any company trying to build its own data infrastructure, for example, in any way, the business model has to be there. The budget has to be there. The ROI has to be there. That's one. The other part is, just remember, building these teams is incredibly difficult. If you think of engineering as a funnel and kind of application programmers and designers sitting on top and distributed systems and database people sitting in the bottom, the numbers are exponentially less. The number of trained people you get who can go build systems like this, because you cannot learn systems only by taking classes, right? Systems is also an art. So I would say, if a company is reaching a scale and has data as a critical business reason, then they can afford to go build infrastructure on their own. Otherwise, this level of infrastructure is kind of hard to build. So I would say we will notice this more as an exception as a rule. Now, that's kind of the provocative part of the statement. The other part is, if you look at infrastructure coming in from the application tier, whether it's in AI, whether it's in BI, whether it's in orchestration, whether you're doing microservice orchestration or you're doing ETL orchestration, those are important but smaller projects. What I'm noticing is application companies, SaaS companies at scale are actually investing in that. Often, they're taking an open source project and contributing to it and expanding it. So I expect that kind of contributions to infrastructure and open source is going to keep on growing from a specialized set of companies. But building the kind of very heavy machinery that we had to build from these 5 companies I named is going to remain an exception and not a rule.
Yep, got it. Well, it's amazing to, many of the folks that you've named already in our discussion obviously have left LinkedIn to start best of breed companies around these open source projects and making them available to the rest of the ecosystem. So it's quite extraordinary, the data culture that this philosophy birthed. And as we've said already, thankfully there's many folks there that want to continue to push forward these projects and commercialize them in ways that are even more usable than just raw open source bits, for the rest of the community and the rest of industry.
Indeed. Yeah, it's exciting. The one thing I'd like to repeat is, open source, now that, I'm an investor and we have a bunch of open source companies, we have Gigabyte, which is open source Postgres, we have Actel, which is open source Data Hub. We have a new investment in the area of Panda that is also open source. We have Tetrade, which is in the open source service mesh area. Open source has become important for one more reason. When large companies want to buy software from startups, they want to risk remediate, say that, hey, I'm going to buy infrastructure. This is going to stay with me for 10 years. I want to make sure it's open source, not just for quality, but for access. It's a downside management play. We hadn't thought of that back 10 years ago. It turns out in the economic life cycle of software, in the buying, selling of software, open source is also an extremely important thing for risk remediation and transparency. So that's just want to make a point there.
Yeah, great point. That's a more mature understanding of sort of, where the open source world has tracked and some of the unseen value that it brings as well, at least unseen from back in the day, as you mentioned. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk a bit more about the broader ecosystem and sort of market insights you might have. I'm curious, what are the main patterns, or what, if you prefer, what mental model do you use when sort of looking at this space overall? Put your investor hat on, right? I mean, I think this is a sort of an investor kind of.
So I'm curious to hear your thoughts there.
Yes. Too many, I think, data and data below AI and data below automation. If you think of AI-directed workflows and automation-directed workflows and application-directed workflows on top, data is going to remain the first-class citizen, and there's going to be tremendous innovation around data going forward. So it's a very exciting area to be in. Few areas that we at 8VC think is really important is going bottom up. We think the convergence of the graduation of APM products to observability products kind of traces logs, multi-level tracing. How do you build these backends? I would say what will be the new backend of a Datadog or New Relic or Splunk? Is Elastic going to work? I would say the very hard problem, time series databases with high cardinality, high dimension. So I would say from a database perspective, that's an exciting area. And I was talking to Kishore a couple of months ago. Kishore, runs the company around Pinot. And one of his interesting observations was that a lot of the backends, that Pinot, Druid, and others, and ClickHouse have built in the context of near real-time OLAP, the kind of the multi-tiered storage, how you do indexing, how do you do learned indexes, that there is an opportunity for convergence of that between the offline nearline side and the online side of observability. So very fertile area, hard things to build, and you have to be very clever in go-to-market. So that's one area. Second is we expect, because so much verticalized data services are available from every one of the three cloud vendors, fragmentation will remain a reality. Data personas are going to grow. There are going to be more personas who will do things with data, use data, store data, make decisions around data. So it is pointless, more departments will use data in more innovative ways for top line reasons, not bottom line. So we expect it's going to be exponential growth in usage of data, and there will be fragmentation. And one of the themes that we have bet on, and we started work on this during my time at LinkedIn, became an amazing project called Data Hub, is we feel like the metadata tier is going to gain more and more importance, and building data catalogs, privacy workflows, governance workflows, search and discovery workflows on top of extensible metadata model and tier is going to be a very important layer. And we have also bet on Actual for that, but I think metadata is going to be key. So number one was that observability, APM, and OLAP backends is going to be really important. Metadata is going to be really important. The other part is less sexy, but 8VC is very big on thinking horizontal but going to market vertical. We have found that as legacy high-time industries like insurance, healthcare, finance, e-commerce, even supply chain and logistics, as they are going through digital transformation, which is cloud first, automation first, data first. I don't like to mention AI because I think we in Silicon Valley probably hype AI more than we should, but that's again a provocative point. Mm-hmm. But a cloud first, data first enterprise, what we are finding is there is enough bespoke difficulty and opportunity in data models and data sources for these verticals. So, how do you build a data lake for one of these verticals really, really easily? I've heard multiple times from very senior people at two of the major cloud vendors that if they had easily buildable data lakes for these verticals, that would be really important. So again, is it pure infrastructure? No, but it's application-specific platforms that you're building. Otherwise, everything goes.
So in that respect, is that to say then that you feel like the majority of the innovation will sort of be coming from the application-specific implementations of data infrastructure in the vertical, but really that's to say that the actual data storage patterns, that we have enough data storage patterns already. And I guess I'm curious if you think that's true, or if you think there's missing data storage and access patterns at the core storage layer that haven't been covered by systems like Pinot and some of the other more forward-looking database systems. Like, is there anything missing there, or is all the innovation just going to be on the applications now and sort of weaponizing this for vertical specific use cases?
I think the applications will drive requirements. So the question is, do you build infrastructure to support only those applications, or is your infrastructure horizontal enough? So it's kind of a Goldilocks problem. It's kind of hard to define. If you look at the API economy that we are going through, who knew that after Yodlee, Plaid, and Stripe would become serious application-specific infrastructures, which are giving rise to enormous amount of business processes and innovation. So, is it purely horizontal? No, but it's horizontal enough for that vertical. So that was the spirit behind my observation, that it's very hard to separate out vertical and horizontal very clearly. There's a gray area, and it's all defined by application needs and TAM. That said, I see that next generation graph engines, I already mentioned backends of observability, right? Next generation time series databases, next generation metadata engines, these are all going to remain important. Are they, from an investor point of view, are each of them going to give rise to $10 billion snowflakes? I'm not sure about it. Are they going to remain important problems where innovation will happen? Yes. Fair enough. I think we only mentioned the data stuff, but I think the other important thing around data is what we at 8VC think about, applications anywhere thesis. Ultimately, the other important point I want to make is the application revolution is accelerating. It's not just in the Java Spring Boot community, but it's now in the, the Jamstack community with Netlify and Vercel, where you're building headless applications more easily. It is the emergence of GraphQL as kind of the data broker integration layer. And what we are finding now is that on all these legacy companies, the speed of application development, which is cloud native, data native, is growing extremely fast. The data tier has to keep pace with it. And that means a cloud data tier, which is available anywhere, replicated anywhere at the push of a button. So we expect that cloud native databases, which are geo-replicated, geo-distributed, lets you implement security, privacy, governance rules easily. The push that is coming from the edge applications anywhere is also going to lead to innovations in data tier. These were just 3 or 4 of my favorite areas, but I can go through 10 more, but for lack of time, I think I'll just give it a pause at this time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very helpful and interesting. I just want to remind the audience, if anyone has any questions, to feel free to chime in the chat, and we'll take your questions for BG before we wrap up. BG, I also wanted to ask you, we sort of, and you've thrown around this term in our chat, right? Data first enterprise. Can we drill into that a little bit more? Like, what do you see that as really meaning? What sort of values are espoused besides? Well, I mean, tell us in your own words, because I'm curious to hear how you might frame it.
Yeah, we had an old saying back in our Yahoo days. I'm sure it's borrowed from somewhere. Is what can be measured can be fixed, right? And we also had everybody use the term garbage in, garbage out, right? So I think data first is actually the first and foremost point around data first is a cultural transformation, that every business process, every department, whether it's HR, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, not just data-driven products and AI, that people are measuring stuff, that they're metrics based. So I would say that revolution in both enterprise software development is usage and also enterprise business models is happening. And what that means is people are becoming more data-driven in their decision making. What that leads to is an explosion of personas. You have data personas, user personas, business analyst personas, who are proliferating in every enterprise department, whether it's specific to an insurance department or it's specific, it's more general, like HR, recruiting, as I said, sales, marketing, supply chain. So I would say that this doesn't just happen randomly. I think data first is both growth of data democracy, but there has to be careful attention paid to the processes around usage of data, generation of data, and also articulation of business value of data. Those are some of the proof points around how growth of personas, how growth of data-driven decisions is kind of fit into what I'm alluding to as a data-first enterprise. Ultimately, it's about measurement-based decision-making, that everything is based on metrics, and more metrics well managed give rise to transparency, and they create secular feedback loops inside the company, which lead to more better data-driven decisions.
And is this explosion of presumably companies desiring to become data-driven and desiring to track more metrics and more analytics across different lines of business, is this what you believe produces the data explosion that drives the interest in valuations of infrastructure companies right now, or is there something else that's required?
You just nailed it. I would say
Mhm.
the growth of business critical applications in enterprises and the growth of user and budgetary personas in enterprises around data are the two secular forces. The
Mhm.
cross product of these two applications, cross personas, is what
Mhm.
is going to drive data innovation. And I think it's a non-linear thing. We're going to see more and more innovation in data there. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Mhm.
That part is mind-boggling. What we see now in all the verticals I mentioned, healthcare, pharma, e-commerce, insurance, all the regulated stuff, financial services, it's just mind-boggling as enterprises are trying to become software first. They're also trying to become cloud first and data first. So
Mhm.
very important phase, and we expect much more innovation to come our way, not less.
Mhm. Agreed. Well, I want to ask you as we wrap up, what advice would you give for engineers out there who are looking to future-proof their career in data? Like, how do you skate to where the puck is going, so to speak, in this fast-moving space? And what are the core skills and experiences and sort of awarenesses you would advise engineers out there to do to stay relevant and to continue to increase their impact as this data infrastructure world moves forward?
Yeah, I think I think growing as an engineer requires kind of conscious set of optimizations. What is possible today that was not possible in our generation as engineers is you can even be a full stack engineer. That was not possible back in the day, right? Because you have services today you can
Mm-hmm.
use database, you can spin up stuff easily. You don't have to worry about compute clusters. You have all these amazing front end frameworks, not just Node.js you can use. So I would say one part of being a good generic engineer is to be able to do full stack work part of the time, right? Because you just learn the entire layering, 3-4 tiers of
Mm-hmm.
layers well. But I think what's important as you go through your career in the first 5-10 years is kind of having some conscious choices around understanding what tier do you want to work in. Do you want to work in the ops tier, absolutely bare bones, in the cloud management side? Do you want to work in the database tier? Do you want to work in the AI infra tier? Do you want to work in the business logic product, what I call product engineering tier, which is where
Mm-hmm.
you're writing the body of microservices, right? Or do you
Mm-hmm.
want to build scaffolding and infrastructure around it? You want to go
Mm-hmm.
actually build a system for Kubernetes? Or do you want to be a front end programmer who uses a lot of frameworks and is very good at working with designers? I think a little bit of conscious understanding of the fact that all of these tiers have different kind of crafts and different kind of design decisions, different flavor of day-to-day work, different flavor in which personas you work with. I think a bit of conscious thinking around that is important. So that's one. Overall, it's good to learn the basics of data services, databases. It's good to learn the basics of AI, at least in using stuff that's out there. And I would say it's good to know the full stack stuff as kind of general knowledge. But
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, if you're a good software engineer and you're good around data, or you're good around cloud, you're good around AI, what an amazing time to be an engineer. I mean, this is the hottest commodity, Pete, as you see. What is the
Mm-hmm.
most common thing we hear from our portfolio companies at every phase? Can you help me hire 10 more engineers? So
Mm-hmm.
I would say the technical area, to coming back to you, the answer to your question, the technical area, what tier you enjoy working is important. The other part is, look, I mean, you have to enjoy your network. You have to enjoy the kind of engineers you work with and
Mm-hmm.
think with and communicate
Mm-hmm.
with. That is really important. I mean, that being part of a guild, being part of a
Mm-hmm.
craftsperson's network, to me is extremely important, kind of talking shop there. And open source allows you to do that, but there are many forums today that it was not there before. Many more, Reddits and subreddits that was not there when we were growing up. So I
Mm-hmm.
would say those are some of the tips, but ultimately, to all the software engineers out there, man, are you lucky to be a good software engineer? This is the best time to be an engineer. So
Yeah, it is a golden era. As you said, you sort of surprised me. I didn't think you were going to go straight for full stack when I was asking really about, data specialization. But I think it's an interesting point, right? And it's a golden era to be an engineer, especially when you can sort of build a product from front to back as an entrepreneur or as a side project or as a hustle or whatever. And you can just sort of experiment and explore many different layers of the engineering process with a lot of that stuff teed up for you, and meaningful services that you can use in a weekend, and then sort of from there, of course, to determine where you might want to focus and go in deeper.
I want to repeat something slightly contrary and unpopular. I think full stack is a good thing to learn and do for a short while, but the conflict is always between being a jack of all trades versus going deep into an area. So I think everybody who's an engineer should kind of think about that on her own and kind of decide what tier you want to work in. Yep.
Agreed. Well, BG, it's been really great to chat with you. I know that you're quite active on LinkedIn, the platform, being an ex-LinkedIn employee. So I know folks can find you there. So I'll encourage them to reach out to you and to connect with you there. I know you're always looking for interesting startups to invest in across these axes that we've discussed. And you're very supportive in the companies that we've co-invested in. It's been amazing to see you dive in with the other founders and really support them early on, as is sort of our motto and value around here as well. So it's been great. So I appreciate that.
Well, thanks, Pete. It's been such a pleasure working with you these last couple of years. I would say people can reach me at Bhaskar@8vc.com anytime, or you can reach me at LinkedIn. We are interested from 8VC. We are interested in anything B2B SaaS, anything horizontal, anything around cloud and data. And we are not just here to invest. People happy to be helpful. I'm also part of the engineering community. I don't think of myself only as a VC, but also as a supporter. So if you're looking for support, if you want to chat, always available. And what a great community you're building, Pete. Thanks for Data Council.
Yeah, anytime. It's been a pleasure, and thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
So to our audience, thanks for joining us. Make sure to stay tuned for additional episodes of DC Thursday as we announce them. And if you want to be notified directly from YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you get notifications when we go online again in the future. Remember, you can find all the old episodes of DC Thursday on YouTube that you can view in a time-shifted way at your leisure. So thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you soon.